Hi everybody, hope you're doing marvellously well. Today I've got something incredibly exciting for me. You may remember a few years ago now, I did a video in our Songs That Change Music series about Sweet Dreams Are Made of This, the song by Eurythmics, which, as far as I'm concerned, is one of the most important songs ever written. When it came out in '83, I believe, it just kicked down the doors of the music industry in Britain. It just came out of the speakers sounding so incredible. And then, of course, researching it, I found out that it was pretty much a DIY album and a DIY song, of course, that Dave Stewart did with Annie Lennox. So I had an extreme pleasure to talk to Mr. Dave Stewart today. So without further ado, let's say hi to Dave. Even though I know your body of work very well, I thought I would do some even more research before talking to you. Geez, you haven't stopped. You're a busy, busy man.
I'm one of these people that can be incredibly focused on something, whatever it needs to be, 4 hours, 1 hour. And then immediately I'm not doing that. I can be focused on something else and the other one doesn't interfere with that one, if you know what I mean. I can move from one subject, and musically as well, was a lot of the time I'm just busy working with Bootsy Collins on one hand, but the next thing two semi-unknown young kids in Spain making acoustic music.
A few years ago, I did a video on Eurythmics, obviously. It was Sweet Dreams. I think I put that in one top 10 most important songs of all time. When it came out, it was, breath of fresh air would be one way of describing it, but that would be an understatement. It just didn't sound like anything else at the time. One of the things I think is so interesting about the song is the fact that the way that song was made is pretty much how everybody makes music now. Because you basically did it as a DIY project. It was like you did it yourself in your little studio apartment, you and Annie.
Well, it wasn't a studio apartment. We started it in a picture framing factory upstairs in the eaves of a picture framing factory.
Right.
So, you had to kind of bend down to walk about. Well, actually, let's go back a bit further. You see, I had one of these moments that you read about, like epiphanies, when you major operation or you nearly die on the operating table or whatever. When I came out of the massive anesthetic, I actually had this sort of feeling like a brand new start, like everything had changed in my mind about everything. I put down the guitar and I went, oh, I think I'm going to make some kind of interesting, strange experiments in my bedroom, right? And Annie was in Scotland. So I had I had a wasp, which I'd got before. I took it in my suitcase to Australia. I was copying what a didgeridoo sounded like in Australia and making this like, wow, using filters and all that. That was actually the beginning of messing around with electronics. And then when I was in my bedroom, I had this wasp and I found out there was a thing called a caterpillar and a spider that went together with it. I really sort of delved into, oh, what else could there be? So I went to this shop in Camden Town that was a guitar shop, but they'd started a little keyboard section. And this is about 1981 I'm talking about. One of the things I got was called a dramatics. The way you would sequence it was just by hitting certain buttons like 3, like 1, 3, or whatever, if you wanted a backbeat, you would do that. And you would use the visual thing, and then I could plug that in and trigger the spider and the caterpillar and that, the wasp. And then when I had real luxury, I got a Roland SH01, which I couldn't believe because it was quite heavy and it was this, larger. At least it was a keyboard you could actually play. And I made probably half of the Sweet Dreams tracks, the basic tracks, on this 4-track in my bedroom. The walk and things like that, on the album. And I've Got an Angel, the dome, 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 da dome, 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 dome. I had this Space Echo, which I still have the same one, with the tape loop. I could make it go into feedback and also, with all the noise by not cleaning the tape, you get this whoosh, So I was having a right old time in my bedroom, and I rang Annie up in Aberdeen and said, "Hey, listen, I've been experimenting and like listen to this," and I was like, "Doom, doom, 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 doom," or the walk like doom, 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 doom. And she was listening down the phone at her parents' house, and I said, "Yeah, it's like just using all these little electronic things joined together. I think we could make something really unusual, and we wouldn't need then, to go book into a studio and a record producer and all the costs, and because we'd already made an album in the garden, didn't do anything really, and the label were obviously thinking, oh, these weird, freaky Eurythmics, crazy name anyway, and the album didn't do much. We went on the old grey whistle test with Holger Sukai and sort of we were going very sort of on purpose. We had Marcus Stockhausen and people like that on our first record and Connie Plank, and we were experimenting.
Amazing.
And then with that part of the brain and then this new electronic thing, I thought, well, we can still experiment, but have like a great groove or a beat or a bass line that holds it down. And then this guy called Adam Williams, he was the bass player in Selector, and he
Great band.
said, hey, well, look, I know how to sort of like what equipment to get to make it into a little bit of a proper studio. We didn't have any money to buy the equipment, so I had to go with Annie. Annie thought this was never going to work, but I sort of asked if I could meet the bank manager in Crouch End opposite the clock tower. There was a bank, and Adam had pictures cut out, and we had this sort of almost like what you would call a PowerPoint nowadays or a PDF, but it was physical. And then I went in there with the bank manager, with Annie, and said, look, if we could buy this stuff secondhand, we can make an album on it. But the thing is, then we could make another album on it. You see, so we wouldn't have to keep paying for it again and again. And we did. We made Be Yourself Tonight on it, the third album. I mean, after Sweet Dreams, we did Touch, and then we did Be Yourself Tonight with the same gear. The bank manager, he understood that bit because I explained how much it was, in a studio and in debt with a record label and all this stuff. That was the birth of, the whole Sweet Dreams album. The Sweet Dreams track, that was more sort of sophisticated in a way, because Adam and I went and sort of slept on the floor of this guy who was in a place called Bridgewater in southern England, who was making this drum computer, but he hadn't finished it. So we got there. We had to spend the night, 2 nights on the floor while he was trying to finish it. And that's the one in the video with the wood surround. Oh, we found it printed out somewhere. Weirdly, it was standing in somebody's garden on the grass next to 2 or 3 other movement audio computers that looked a bit more, they didn't have the wood around it, but I keep wondering where it is now. How did it get into somebody's garden? But because when we got inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I wanted to put that and all the things that we made Sweet Dreams on, they have like in the actual museum they have a big glass space for each act, whether it's Alice Cooper or whoever it is. Oh, by the way, the bank manager, he agreed. The whole lot was about £4,800.
Wow.
And he agreed, and it was like, oh my God, Annie nearly fell over. I was trying to sort of keep a straight face. We
That's
thought he was going
amazing.
to he thought he was going to kick us out. That's
I
how
can't
we made
imagine
it.
early 80s, a bank manager just sticking their neck out like that. That's incredible.
I know. Well, after that, we sent him like gold and platinum albums and everything, and he was like, you need people like that at some point. This is very complicated situation at the moment for artists or bands starting off their career, and trying to use social media and sort of putting their track up on Spotify, and like,
Yeah.
how do they get any slight income to get started?
Yes, there is no artist development anymore, is there?
Now, it's like, how many TikTok views have you got? How many Instagram followers? And, it's just so ridiculous. Imagine, see the kid or whoever was the young A&R guy that walked in a pub and saw Led Zeppelin and ran back to his label and said, oh my God, I've just seen the future of rock and roll. They would take interest and go, oh,
Yeah.
well, maybe we should go and see them, Frank Zappa, he was talking about he liked it better in the, the early days, because even though he'd make an album called Weasels Rip My Flesh, the guys from the label, who might have been mobsters or whatever, would go, well, Frank, we don't really know what you're talking about, mate, but, the kids might like it. So, you know, they were, they probably thought it was like the weirdest thing they'd ever heard or seen. But they say, who are we to judge? We're guys in our 50s. And now, of course, all the algorithms and the kind of, there's only three labels, so labels buying each other up. And then you have all of the DSPs, and it's just so alienating to, 99.9% of young artists.
I read a great quote from Noel Gallagher, of all people, but it was a great quote where he said, great art isn't made for the general public, it's made for yourself. And I was going through your body of work, and I was thinking about, within 2 years of this, even 18 months, 2 years of this being a massive hit, you were already co-writing with Tom Petty, and obviously had a massive hit with Don't Come Around Here No More. Just so people don't know, obviously you had been in the music industry for a long time at that period, because you'd had a deal on Elton John's label. Obviously, you and Annie had the Taurus in the late 70s. And I remember being on Top of the Pops. There was no flash in the pan or anything like that. I mean, obviously, you were here to stay.
No.
Still, it's 18 months later, and there you are. You're co-writing with Tom Petty and having an absolute...
Well, what happened, going back to that sort of epiphany in the hospital bed, you see, before that, those other bands, I wasn't really a songwriter. We signed, there was four of us, had a band, and we signed to Elton John's label. I was only 18 or 19 years old. And then in the Tourists, the guy who wrote all the songs was called Pete Coombs. After I had that sort of moment when my life changed, I never stopped writing. So I didn't have to think about it, like, Don't Come Around Here No More. I've seen lots of things written about it, even lately, people sort of analysing it and saying, how come that was on Southern accents? Not well, basically, I was in a hotel room in San Francisco with my from then on, I used to carry around this little 4-track and all that, the little dramatics, and I'd just bought a Coral sitar guitar, and I had that. I made the whole track, and I sang this chorus, Don't Come Around Here No More. And I made down, 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 and the whole thing, and the groove and everything was all on a 4-track. So when we made it with Tom, we didn't try and copy it. You couldn't. So we just bounced the 4-track onto the 16 or 24 track, whatever it was. And then Tom was just singing on top of it. Basically, there was lots of periods in Eurythmics. Now, we looked like we did make a lot of albums in a row. I can't remember, like 7 in 8 years or whatever. But funny enough, we had a lot of time. Well, Annie had a lot of time off because she would just not want to tour for a year or, just have a big break. And I was feeling like inspired to do things. And I was getting approached by people, but mainly it was just like bumping into somebody, and they were going, oh, like, do you want to fancy going and doing this? And this might sound nuts, but these were anybody from Mick Jagger to Daryl Hall, So something about 1984 or something like that, Daryl Hall came to write and make a record with me. Just got the church in Crouch End. It wasn't really set up yet. We had a tiny little room squeezed to one side. But the thing is, when he came, we didn't really know each other. So I said, oh, I'll tell you what, why don't we I just made a pot of like psilocybin mushroom tea. And there was this great guy, T-Bone Walk, his bass player, and he was going, no, Daryl, don't drink that, don't drink that. And Daryl was like, yeah, come on, man. It'll be an experience. So trouble was, I must have put way too much in because I didn't really know, it wasn't measured out like gummies or something. And we drank it. And we both just became basket cases, like just crying, laughing. Couldn't do anything at all. We had to go to my house in a taxi with the bass player really fed up. And we couldn't do anything. When we got to my house, that's a whole other story. Daryl tells it with me on Daryl's house. But yeah, it was just nuts. But, you know, we had bonded over this pot of tea. So a lot of my sort of like, in inverted commas, songwriting sessions were sort of mad experiences like that. You know, when
Right.
people say, oh, how do you write this song? We can't really explain it. It wasn't like you sat at a grand piano staring out the window, you know, with an open book and like, I think I'll write about the seascape, you know. They were just like really nutty experiences. The same with Tom, you know, that's why the video ended up being the Mad Hatter, you know.
For me, your work has always been ahead of its time. When I think about Eurythmics, for instance, it's really a fusion of everything that was happening at the time and everything that happened in the past. I think one of the unique things I love about being British is that when we turn it on the radio, 50% of it is like R&B and soul music mixed in with current pop. And
Mm.
I think we're blessed with that. And obviously, you know, you blended rock, you blended the current kind of electronic music. I suppose at that point, New Romantics and all the post-punk and new wave stuff that was going on. But you had a lot of soul in it. You had like tons and
Well,
tons of soul in it.
yeah, exactly. You see, Annie and I were nuts about Stax, R&B, and Motown, and this. So what I did, decide to do with Annie in the studio when we first got this 8-track tape recorder, which was like we were like, whoa, it was like a magic sort of things coming off it, you know. The trouble with this is there could be lots of possibilities. So necessity is the mother of invention. So I got like the whiteboard. I still do to this day. We've got one just sat up there, in there. And there's a line down the middle. And then Annie and I would say, what do we like? What do we not like? And then we'd write likes, you know, Stax, R&B, soul, electronic, you know, a mixture of things. And what we don't like, and then we'd write a list down there. And if we found ourselves wandering into the other side, we'd immediately stop. So it's quite a good sort of method because you can. I mean, Annie and I are both musical, and we could make any kind of music, really. And we did. We knew that what we wanted to do. Like after Revenge, which we said, okay, we're playing now in big arenas and all this stuff. Let's try these different things. We then went and made Savage, which was like completely the opposite, back to total electronic. In fact, I bought this synclavier off this film composer who was married to Buffy Sainte-Marie, and her voice was still in it. There's a lovely guy who's our drummer, Ulla from Sweden, who has a great technology brain as well. Ulla and I sat in what's called the fumoir, this tiny room where if you're in a chateau or wherever, where people would smoke cigars, you know, with this giant synclavier filling up nearly all the room. We made all the backing tracks on this thing, but it was painful, you know, it took ages. In fact, I used to ride around on a bicycle and shout through the window to Ula, any sound yet? Trying to wrangle it into making anything like a beat, but we... And the sounds on it we loaded in, Connie Plank and I had recorded in
Wow.
Japan. We went into the Japanese bamboo forests and tapped on things and threw rocks about and all sorts. And so all the sounds you hear on that album are a mixture of Connie and I, you know, importing them into this thing. All the way through Eurythmics period, including Sweet Dreams, which you brought first, was just a mad experiment.
The Connie Plank thing is it's interesting. I hadn't really thought to talk to you about that, but I think another thing of that period is I always say to people, new wave in Britain was kind of like a punk rock ethic, but it was like disco meets German synth pop. And Connie comes up all the time in discussion. How did you get to him? I mean, what was your sort of route? What were you listening to?
Well, that was just completely nuts. There was a guy, Spooky John Thomas or Wild John Thomas or something like that, his name, an Australian guy. And he asked Annie and I, he was in Crouch End, if we would come with him in a van and sort of help him make this album at this guy's studio in Germany. He didn't make music that was anything like ours, you know, but we were like moral support. We weren't recording us, but right at the end, we asked if we could just put one song down, a song called Exclusive that Pete had written. And it was really good. And then Connie really liked us, Annie and myself. We had an idea, decided to be Eurythmics when Tourist broke up, to let's get in touch with Connie Plank. And he welcomed us with open arms, you know. And he actually taught me all about recording, well, lots about recording. If we want to go into sort of life discussions, I might have heard it off an old lady talking. I can't remember how I heard it, but attitude and gratitude are two things that I think are really important. So going into a room or going into a project or going into anything, your attitude, you know, comes in with you and everybody can feel it. And that's how I ended up writing all these songs and producing all these people. And I have letters from all of them and everything, you know, just they had a great time, or we all had a great time. And then afterwards, you know, being thankful for, you know, your blessings. I mean, I don't know, for some reason I've led this really amazing life journey through learning to play the guitar in Sunderland on a 5-string guitar with the man next door who just, you know, was one of the few people who survived the Japanese prisoner of war camp. And he was teaching me a bit on it. And he died a couple of years ago at 102, I think.
Wow.
Mr. Gibson. And I knew he played the guitar, but I didn't realize he tuned it to a chord. So when my brother's friend came round, I'd been told playing it, and he went, "Oh, this is all out of tune," and sort of tuned that. Went, "Oh God," to learn the whole thing again.
Diverse would be the understatement of the decade.
Yeah.
You've got TV shows, you had Songland with Ryan and other great writers. You've done musical theatre. You did Barbarella in Austria.
Oh, that was great, yeah.
Ghost the Musical, The Time Traveler's Wife. Was there a different mindset when you're doing things like that?
It's all collaborating with people, and on something like a stage play or a musical, there's just more people. So you're not in a room with one person writing a song. I love collaborating, you see, and so I really dig in and get involved. I'm great friends with Glenn Ballard, so when I was asked if I wanted to do the music on Ghost the Musical, I said to Glenn, "Hey, do you want to do it with me?" He'd never done a musical before either, but he'd written, you know, Jagged Little Pill with Alanis Morissette. He wrote Man in the Mirror for Michael Jackson. Basically, he's a great guy, and we had like a studio next door to each other. And so how usually I start getting involved is I get approached about something, and then I decide whether I want to do this on my own or collaborate with somebody who I get on really well with, because I know it's going to be a long journey. Ghost of Musical's still on in countries all over the world, you know, so I go and see it in Madrid. I took my kids to see it in Paris. It's all in French, it's all in Spanish. It's kind of good fun. But my recent thing, because we could go around the world and back with all this stuff, is probably the most unusual that people never expected. I started about a year ago. In between setting up a different session, I just put the iPhone on a stick, you know, and film myself, and I'd sing a Bob Dylan song that I used to play in the folk club when I was like 15 or 16. I would post it, you know, just, "Hey, here's a Bob Dylan song I used to play in the folk club when I was a kid." And then everybody said, "Oh, I'd love to hear this on an album." So slowly my management said, "Look, we think it would be a great vinyl album." So that's coming out on Record Store Day. But people would be going, "What? Dave Stewart, Bob Dylan?" But if then you look back through my life, you'll see Bob Dylan and I, not only did I play songs in folk clubs, but we became great friends, and we've done all sorts of things together, including me filming him with all sorts of... So it's not, for me, it's not that strange. I think people that didn't know... So if you go back in the last 10 years or whatever, when I first arrived in Nashville, which is where I am now, I made a trilogy of albums, like all on the spot, you know, and played them live in Nashville. That would be a hint, the kind of thing that I like doing now and then. And I would write all the songs on my own, I didn't co-write with anybody, but I'd do a duet with Alison Krauss, or, different people were hanging in the studio, like, what's this guy doing in Nashville? I suppose a lot of the time it's like a way of life. It's like, hey, like, so what am I going to do today? So a lot of artists and young artists are very frustrated because they're like, an artist, I'm writing songs, I really want to play, I want to do something, but what do I do during the day? It's not like you can just sit in the house on your own and just, carry on writing songs in your bedroom. You can, but after a while, I think you'll get very disorientated and cut off from everything else. So I just decided to go out amongst everybody and have, like, I don't want to be lying on my deathbed thinking, oh, that was a great business meeting, or that was, I want to be I want to think about all of the music and children and life, like living life as full as I can.
If you could give one piece of advice to somebody up and coming who is looking at your career and seeing how incredible and varied it is?
Depending on what kind of music, if they're a solo artist or a band or whatever, I would say ignore just about everything to do with social media. Don't follow everybody and try and get millions of TikTok views from the scratch, and all that stuff, because influencers, they do that as a living and they've worked out how to do it. I would scrape together enough, or go like Jack and Daisy on public transport and play to real people. Because you see, if you go and play to 10 people and you're really good and they like it, they usually tell roughly between 5 to 8 other people that, oh, I saw these, people play, and then you go and play at the same place again about 3 months later. So if you're in Sunderland, would like work out the various places within like a 100-mile radius, and however you're going to get there, and you go and you just keep going around that. Now, what I'm talking about is what we all did at the beginning. It's like, yeah, we went and played, and eventually you got to London, but by then some people had heard about you and there might be an article and whatever. That would be my advice. And as a songwriter, if you just want to write songs and let people hear them, but you're not particularly an artist, I would get together with somebody who's a great singer or whatever the kind of music it is, in your bedroom or wherever you are, play the songs with them, maybe just let them co-write with you or whatever. And they might, be successful by going and singing them on, Instagram or whatever it is. But I think the physical act of doing it is really hard to beat that, that people, when people saw anybody from Adele singing live to the Ramones, if you were nuts about the Ramones or whatever, and you went to a punk club, CBGB's in New York or wherever, Moles in Bath, and you saw this band and you loved them, you would run around telling your friends. I remember at school, we would all the kids would have written on what they called a haversack. Weird name, but it's like a bag you put on your back with your school books in it that weighed a ton. And they would write Deep Purple or whatever, or whoever they were. They would walk around saying, I love this band. And then other people, they would meet friends who also liked that band. The Clash, I loved when the Cosmo Vinyl sort of went sticking posters up saying, here's 3 chords, now form a band, signed the Clash or whatever. Physical things, they're not out of the realm of really helping you more than trying to compete with people who are massive, like Taylor Swift or whatever, or just really brilliant at social media. Most artists just can't stand it,
Yeah, it is interesting. I've noticed that the last couple of years, a lot of big social media artists on platforms like YouTube, for instance, they have massive followings, and then they book a tour and then do a video of how they lost tons of money on tour.
That's a whole other, okay, like for instance, how do you wipe the slate clean and start again, to do with the whole thing to do with the music industry. Because it was never set up to help artists in the first place. You know, the people who invented the phonograph thought, oh, we better put a recording on it. And so people knew what it was. So there was just people talking at first, you know, speeches. And then they went to record somebody in a music hall, and a song was called Algernon Simply Awfully Good at Algebra. This was the first ever song recorded on a phonograph. And Malcolm McLaren and I did a version of it. I think Jeff Beck as well is on it. The trouble was, it was kind of in a waltz timing, and he wanted to make it a dance record. Oh my God, because the whole album was called Waltz Darling. Anyway, it was one of the most complicated things. It's like that thing, you know, where you're trying to do that.
I'm trying to think of a 4 on the floor and a 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2.
Yeah. So they were trying to sell record players, you know, like phonographs, not the music. They didn't care about that, obviously, because. So, you know, Steve Jobs was doing the same thing. He said, oh, I can solve all your problems here. I've made this thing. It's an iPod, and, you know, here's iTunes. Although he didn't care about that. He wanted to sell the product, of which the company made very good-looking products that made them a lot more money than trying to sell music. And so all the way along, artists have been screwed basically left, right, and center. So the changing of the guard, even though there's lots of people doing great jobs in their little own sort of spheres, I always wish there'd be a tidal wave, you know, like the book, The Blue Ocean Strategy, you know, where it's like, okay, so there's all these people in the blood red sea over here. You want to be swimming with a couple of other people in the blue ocean. Whether that time's going to come or not, we don't know. And that's also to do with a massive subject, which we shouldn't approach right now, to do with the state of the world politically as we speak.
Well, that was actually the one thing we didn't really touch on was, you know, you were deeply involved with Nelson Mandela's 46664 campaign. In fact, wasn't it your idea to take that and use it as a telephone number?
Yeah. He wanted to turn the most negative number in his life. He'd been called that in a prison for 30 years, solitary confinement, and only called by a number, 46664. He wanted to turn it into a positive number and spread awareness about the AIDS virus spreading throughout Africa, because people were all jumbled up about what it was and how to eradicate it, if possible. So the only way I could think that would work in a big way would to have a telephone number, 46664, with a prefix. I thought, how the do I get this to work all over the world, and where do we start? So I went around to see Richard Branson, who had just started, I think, Virgin Mobile, and I showed him. Bono and I were writing a song, and we'd filmed it going around America and getting people together. Like, I can't even explain how mad it was, but, you know, we ended up on stage with Springsteen in Miami. Then we were in New York in the Hit Factory. We got Beyonce and Pharrell, and then Oprah Winfrey arrived, and then we had the NFL and the heads of the NFL. At one point, we also didn't go to sleep for a long time, you know, like 3 days or whatever at a time. And at one time, we were in the elevator in the Hit Factory, and we were laughing about this. We kept pressing the button up and down because we realized we had all these people, and there was arguments going on with the heads of the NFL. We called up Nelson Mandela because we wanted to have his face all glowing on the pitch, and Beyonce singing, and the amount of effort, work and effort to actually bring together something like that. It's all in this book, right? So, and going to Africa, you know, being in the house, in his house with Mr. Mandela, then, you know, bringing in Bono and Beyonce to there, and then getting great help from Queen, you know, Roger Taylor, then Brian May, and then Beyonce turned up, so it was their greatest experience playing in Africa, and it turned into the biggest concert in African history. So that all started by the telephone number, see? So the telephone number, we got Mr. Mandela to answer the phone if you rang it, in all countries around the world. And then you would hear songs by myself and Bono and Edge, or myself and Paul McCartney, or whoever. You could only hear them on the phone if you rang it, see? And that the donations were going straight into the campaign.
Absolutely incredible. I really want to thank you ever so much for taking the time out. It's been an absolute pleasure. You know, I try not to fanboy. You know, I grew up on your music, and I moved to the north of England, not Sunderland, but Carlisle. We used to go to Sunderland a few times and play shows. And I played in a club band, and we would, you probably know the routine, playing in all the working men's clubs and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
When I was about 16, I left home young and went and did it. And we would play disco, new wave, and Sweet Dreams. We had a girl singer, and we would do a cover of Sweet Dreams. And very many fond memories. It was a great baptism of fire to go out and do all of those kind of covers and play all those working men's clubs. Because we had a girl singer, you probably heard these kinds of stories, if not experienced them. She wasn't allowed in until we went on stage.
Oh, yeah, in a workman's club. Yeah, it's crazy. Well, you know, when I was playing in folk clubs, I used to look about 12 when I was about 15 or 16. And they wouldn't allow me in till this really nice guy who ran the folk club went, oh, come on, give him a chance. And then they got a shock when I turned up and was playing a Bob Dylan song, because they were all singing with their hand over their ear going, well, we're going down the mine, and, you know, and I'm going like, well, you know, used to sit and wonder why, babe. And they go, what the hell? Who is this kid?
So amazing. We used. I grew up in a village called Crookham Village, and there was a pub called the Fox and Hounds. And on Tuesday they would have There was a folk club in the back room of the Fox and Hounds. And it's amazing because if you were doing those folk tours, they would have the most insane talent come through. You know, it could be the local all around my hat, you know, kind of stuff going on.
Or they would have John Martin, or
exactly,
or Davy Graham, or that was my sort of real massive learning experience, was in the folk club. There was about 2 or 3 in Sunderland, and then there was another one just outside of Sunderland. And yeah, I just see these incredible people come through, kind of Ralph McTell kind of people. But I mean, without that, I don't know how I would have broken into playing anywhere. And unfortunately, in Britain, there's lots of these tiny places are being closed down. Part of the whole problem of the bands can't get to play. It's like, it has a sort of knock-on effect.
I really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man. Thank you ever so much. It's been a wonderful, wonderful time talking to you. And
well, next time we'll have a jam session when it's all sorted out.
Don't make idle promises, because I'll take you up on it.
I don't. All right then.
Good.
Cheers.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks ever so much. Thanks, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that. If you haven't already, please check out the Songs That Change Music episode of Sweet Dreams. Thanks, everyone. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios, goodbye.